New videos are coming soon on Jaguar Gator 8 and Jaguar Gator 7. Now that the new studio is up and running, we have time to commit to those channels again. Make sure to click the link in the description so you can subscribe to the channels now so you don't miss a moment of the action. And now, on with our feature presentation. A long time ago, and I truly mean a long time ago, as it was over 3 years ago back when this channel had just around 2,000 subscribers, I made a video talking about this man right here, Green Bay Packers kicker Don Chandler. If you want to learn more about his story, you can do so by clicking the card in the upper right corner. However, to make a long story short, before Chandler cemented his legacy with the Packers, Chandler was on the New York Football Giants and had been the team's kicker and punter for the past 9 seasons. However, in 1965, when it came time for him to negotiate a new contract, he put in a rather bizarre request. What if I don't practice whatsoever with the team? I live in Oklahoma, and I just fly out and join the team during game days. I play with you guys on the weekend, and on the weekdays, I'm on my own halfway across the country in Oklahoma, where I went to high school, just doing whatever I want. Understandably, the Giants were not too thrilled about the idea of a weekend player, and they outright rejected his contract demand, to which he never played another game for them, and eventually joined the Green Bay Packers, who, shocker, also did not want him as a weekend player. So why do I bring this story up from the 1960s that I already talked about 3 years ago on this channel? Well, that's because even though Don Chandler proposed this insane deal that would never fly in today's NFL, he was not the last one to do it. In fact, he was not even the last special teams player to do it. Because about a decade later, in the 1972 offseason, this man right here, St. Louis Cardinals specialist Chuck Latourette, wanted to do something similar, where he was contemplating retirement and was going to walk away from the sport forever, call it a career, and hang up the cleats for good, never playing another game in the National Football League. Unless he got a bizarre request fulfilled from the Cardinals organization and head coach Bob Hallway. As for how this all played out in the end, well, you might be surprised, or you might not be. Who's to say? Because this is the story behind what might just be, considering the circumstances, the strangest retirement situation in the more than century-long history of the Cardinals franchise. Before I talk about the actual retirement and the request in question, we need some context to understand just who Chuck Latourette is. Because even though he didn't play a whole lot of seasons of the National Football League, he had quite the career and had quite the interesting background. What you're probably noticing about Latourette throughout all of these highlights and throughout all of his footage is that he was a true jack of all trades who did just about everything. Whereas most players are confined to one position, and that's all they play, Chuck Latourette did just about everything. You needed him to be a defensive back? He did that, and started 5 games at safety for the Cardinals, even scoring a touchdown on a fumble recovery in a 1970 game against Washington in the regular season finale. You needed him to be a return man and return some kicks and punts for you? He did that as well. And during the 1968 season, he might have legitimately been the best return man in all of football. Seriously, this guy, a freaking punter, Chuck Latourette, was the top guy in the league in punt returns. Remember how back in the 1970s, Joe Theismann returned punts, even though he was a quarterback? You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Well, this is like if Theismann happened to be the best punt returner in football. That's how absolutely bizarre and insane this was, as in 1968, he led the NFL with 345 punt return yards, averaging 12.3 yards per punt return, and he led the NFL with 1,237 kickoff return yards, averaging 26.9 yards per return. He was actually the NFL leader in all-purpose yards during the 1968 season, picking up just under 1,600 yards, or over 100 yards per game, in the 14-game season. For some perspective on just how good Chuck Latourette was at that position during his prime, and how good he was at filling this role, Latourette was the first Cardinal to lead the NFL in kick return yards since Jimmy Sears did it back in 1958, when the team was back in Chicago and not St. Louis. He was the first Cardinal to lead the NFL in punt return yards since Billy Stacy did it back in 1959. He was the first Cardinal to lead the NFL in kick return and punt return yards in the same season. And he was the first Cardinal to lead the league in all-purpose yards since Woodrow Lewis did it back in 1959, when, once again, the team was still playing in Chicago. Chuck Latourette was one of the most valuable players in the league at his peak simply because of how good he was at so many different positions, and how he saved you money and roster spots as a result of it. Because even though he played defensive back, and even though he was one of the best return men in football during the late 1960s, that was not his primary position. Because first and foremost, Chuck Latourette was a punter, which will become important in just a bit, because by the end of his career, Latourette was no longer returning kickoffs and punts, so all he was doing was punting the football. And that's truly a plug-and-play position with no playbook required. Latourette didn't play in 1969 after suffering a season-ending knee injury during an interleague preseason game against the Kansas City Chiefs of the American Football League when he was returning a kickoff. But he was the team's punter for 4 seasons, punting from 1967 to 68, and then again from 1970 to 71. In those 4 seasons, Latourette averaged 40.5 yards per punt. Now today, that might not sound like a great total at all. However, back in the late 60s and the early 70s, this was really, really good. During the 1968 season in particular, when he averaged 41.6 yards per punt, not only was this the 4th highest average in the league amongst all qualified punters, but this was at a time when the league-wide average, taking him out of the equation, was under 40 yards per punt. On top of that, Latourette had the speed to run some well-executed fake punts, and to get out of danger and abort a play if things with the blocking went haywire. Safe to say, Chuck Latourette was a jack of all trades, and even though he had a bit of a down year in 1971, where he was near the bottom of the league in yards per punt and in net yards per punt, it seemed clear that he was going to come back in 1972 and play another season in the league. Heck, he was only going to be 27 years old, which is nothing for anyone, let alone a punter. And even though the Cardinals had 19 picks in the 1972 NFL Draft, taking a player at just about every position, at the very least, for some added competition, they did not use a single one of those 19 picks on a punter. So make no mistake about it, the Cardinals were fully expecting Chuck Latourette to play with the team in 1972, and to be the team's punter for yet another season. However, for Latourette, there was more to life than football. There are some people that for them, football is life, and there is no plan B. They have no plans, no goals, and no ambitions after their football career is done, and can't even begin to think about a future while they're still playing in the league. And then there's Chuck Latourette, who was super smart and was out there trying to save the world. Because while Latourette played football with the Cardinals on a full-time basis during the season, in the off-season, he was in school and was getting his medical degree at the University of Tennessee Colleges of Medicine in Memphis. And now, he was just a few months away from graduating, as he was on track to become a doctor and officially receive his medical degree in December of 1972. And even though Latourette was good at football and had played for a while, he always wanted to become a doctor, as that had been his dream since he was in 9th grade. He didn't want to juggle football and school anymore by putting his education to the side for another fall semester. He couldn't do it anymore. He was dead set on graduating by December of 1972 and beginning his life as a doctor. And when training camp started for the Cardinals, and everyone had to report in the middle of July, there was one notable name that was not in attendance over in Lake Forest, Illinois. That man was Chuck Latourette. Having said that, even though Latourette wanted to finish medical school and wanted to finally be able to start that career of his, as that was his number one priority, he was not ready just yet to give up football. He spent 14 years playing the sport. It helped make him who he was. He was good at it, and he loved playing it. So he had an interesting proposal to the Cardinals brass and to head coach Bob Hallway, who you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. All I really do at this point is punt the football. Don't get me wrong, punting is important, and a good punter can win you a game, and a bad punter can lose you a game. But it's something that doesn't require a knowledge of the playbook, or great fitness and stamina levels, or anything intensive. You have a player on the team already in Donnie Anderson who has experience punting the ball, so it's not like he can't run special teams plays during the week. What if, in this scenario, I only show up on weekends? I'll join you guys on Saturday. I'll play with you guys on Sunday and punt the ball. And then I'll leave the team for the next 5 days so I can go back to Memphis and focus on medical school. I'll play in the NFL on a part-time basis. By doing this, I get the best of both worlds. You guys get to keep me around. You don't have to go searching for another punter, and everyone wins. And to make things even sweeter, I made $30,000 last year. I'm willing to take a pay cut by more than 50%, and I'm willing to play for just $14,000, or the NFL minimum. I will cut my pay by more than half, thereby freeing up money for you if you let me do this, where I am only with you guys on the weekend. Now we'll get to what the Cards' reaction to this was in a minute, because it's about what you would expect. But let's first hear from the man and half punter, half doctor himself, Chuck Latourette. Said Latourette on all of this, "It's always been my intention to be a doctor. It wasn't any great crossroads decision not to report. It came time where I felt I needed to devote full time to medicine. I've got enough money ahead to carry me through. I'm not really sweating it. I proved I could play pro ball, and being a doctor has always been my goal." In other words, this was not a bluff on Latourette's part by any means. He was making his request very simple. Let me play on the weekends, and weekends only, or I'm just going to retire and walk away from the sport and focus on my number one priority, which is medicine and finishing my education. And as you might have been able to guess, the Cardinals were not receptive to this idea at all. Not in the slightest bit. In fact, when they heard this proposal, they were so insulted by it that they just outright refused, and they cut off all contact with him. It's almost like how in the old NHL games, if you made a trade with someone, and the trade offer was so ridiculous that the other team could just block your number, so you could never do any business with that general manager ever again, because he just refused to pick up the phone and take you seriously. That's what this was. Said Latourette, "I asked the Cardinals if they would let me play for them only on weekends, but they haven't been receptive to the idea. I haven't talked to them lately. And as much as we can clown on the Bidwills and talk about how terrible owners they were, and as much as we can hate on head coach Bob Hallway for his incompetence and for how poorly he ran this football team, I can't really blame the Cardinals here for doing this and for preventing this man that you've been watching this whole time, Chuck Latourette, from doing this proposal of his where he was there for only 2 days a week, even if you could completely understand where Latourette was coming from. Number one, what kind of message does that send? How are you going to fine players for missing practice, or for being late to practice, or suspend them, and then you're going to start Chuck Latourette every single game? You can't do it without losing the team and seeming like a massive hypocrite, or that you're playing favorites. How are you going to emphasize the importance of practice and winning your job on the practice field when Latourette's job is just handed to him by not attending a single practice? You can't do that. You just can't. Number 2, where do you draw the line? Obviously, Latourette had a legitimate reason for wanting to miss practice, as he was devoting time during the week to finishing his medical degree and becoming a doctor. But does this mean that if a player has a business on the side and wants to run his business on weekdays, he can do that too? If a player wants to go to law school, or dental school, or anything like that on weekdays, can he do that? It's a very slippery slope, where you wind up playing favorites and making all sorts of exceptions, and you lose authority, respect, and control very, very quickly. And number 3, even though Latourette was a very good player, it's not like he was irreplaceable. It wasn't like this was Justin Tucker asking for this request. This was a man who was already not on the best of terms with Hallway after a poor 1971 season where he muffed a snap against the Philadelphia Eagles, where Hallway called out Latourette, and where Latourette said on his head coach, he's alienating a lot of the players. This was a man who was near the bottom of the league in 1971 in yards per punt and in net yards per punt, and special teams is an extremely fickle business. So even though you can completely understand where Chuck Latourette was coming from, because he wanted to get his degree and become a doctor while also playing football, you can also completely understand and agree with the Cardinals' decision to emphatically deny the request and say, no, you have to be at practice to be on this team and to be our starting punter. And likewise, you can absolutely understand why Latourette, upon hearing that, hung it up for good and eventually finished medical school that December and never played another down in the NFL ever again. He made a request, the Cardinals denied that request, and he responded by doing exactly what he said he was going to do if that request wasn't fulfilled. A lot of drama, and yet not a lot of drama at the same time. Kind of funny how that worked out. Regardless, with the money that players make today in the NFL, the fact that players are not working jobs in the offseason to support themselves and are full-time players, and with the added emphasis on special teams and practices and analytics and sports science and nutrition and wanting the guys in the building at all times for those reasons and whatnot, I can't possibly imagine anything like this happening today. But in 1972, St. Louis Cardinals punter and jack of all trades Chuck Latourette tried to get the Cardinals to agree to it, in what was a bizarre ending to a bizarre career when you look at everything that he accomplished and everything that he did in such a short period of time. Because even though Latourette tried it, the Cardinals said, no, you have to practice with us. Doctor's orders. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.